You know that things are bad whenever you hear any statement in the popular press, you immediately think it's a lie, regardless of what it is, and especially if it makes no logical sense whatsoever. A prime example is the Democratic state talking point about conservative states being dependent on them. One of the main spreaders of this falsehood is the Democratic Party's whopper teller in chief, Gavin Newsom. This is the same guy that the far-left Los Angeles Times called out for budget gimmicks intended to cover up the state's massive spending deficit. Same guy who supported reparations until they actually passed. The guy who hilariously called California the, quote, true freedom state, more free, says Mr. Newsom, than Texas or Florida. Well, I guess if you're going to lie, you might as well go big. California is running a massive deficit. Texas is running a surplus. Florida is running a surplus. But yes, definitely. California is the maker, and these other states are the takers. Okay, let me summarize how they're coming to this laughable conclusion. Strategy number one. The federal government is forcibly confiscating money from the productive sectors of the conservative states against the will of these states. And then the federal government is sending it back to the unproductive sectors of these states in order to create what is called a negative balance of payment ratio. This means, from a technical standpoint, a state is receiving more in federal money than it is paying to the federal government. This results in many headlines in the leftist press like, hypocritical red states reliant on blue states. Texas is financially dependent on California. Not so fast, Governor Newsom. I'll explain, but first, let me give you an analogy that sums this up. You have two children, one of whom is substantially more financially successful than the other. One of your rich uncles decides this is unfair, and he decides to send, without consulting you, payments to the poorer child that equalizes the income difference between the two. Now you may think this is unfair, destructive, counterproductive, and an egregious intrusion into your family's affairs. But that doesn't stop him. After this has gone on for a while, the uncle tells you that you are a dependent nephew because of the payments he has made against your will to the poorer sibling. Entitlement and welfare programs are a prime example of this. In the case of welfare, for example, the federal government initiates deficit spending to fund a massive increase in government handouts. It then sends these handouts, which many states think are destructive and counterproductive, to the citizens of these states and then screams, dependent state. It's ridiculous. The bloated federal government has, unfortunately, been successful in getting some of the citizens of red states addicted to their deficit spending in the form of entitlements such as Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Thanks to the state-by-state structure of the United States, there is still hope of unraveling these ticking financial time bombs at a state level, even if the federal government is too greedy and cowardly to do it. For example, 10 states have rejected the further bloating of their dependent sectors by refusing to participate in the Medicaid expansion passed by Obama in 2014. After initially paying for most of this expansion, the federal government will eventually transfer more and more of this responsibility to the states, and in this way create yet another out-of-control entitlement. Kudos to the states who refuse to continue to stumble blindly down this road. Another reason that the dependent state talking point is a myth is that the overwhelming majority of people who are receiving government handouts are Democrats, mostly urban Democrats, and many of these Democrats, unfortunately, for the free states, are living in the conservative states. So, Gavin Newsom's greedy constituents who have chosen to live in Texas, for example, are sucking up a large portion of the handouts that Mr. Newsom is using to make his dependent state government argument. So yes, very clearly, the idea that conservative states are dependent in any real sense on liberal states is laughably inaccurate. With any luck at all, the free states will find more ways to separate themselves from the leeching federal welfare state. And in the case of Texas, as I've discussed in prior videos, this may happen sooner rather than later. and in a way that, well, let's just say encourages some on the left and currently living in the Lone Star State to move their parasitic ways right into good old Gavin Newsom's backyard.